Good morning. You're listening to Dr. Heather Williamson, the Leadership Doc, host of Talking Leadership. And I'm really excited to actually have a friend of mine on today. We met this past summer doing some work together for VCU's Performance Management Group. And she has an amazing background. And I thought I would have her as my guest today on Talking Leadership because that's what you do as well, from a CFO accounting perspective. So you're listening to 106.1 FM on ESPN. So I have with me Susan Rucker. She is the managing partner of Lead Spark Consulting and the CFO for the William and Mary Business School Foundation. Welcome to the radio show, Susan.
It's great to be here. And I enjoyed meeting you this summer. And this is a great bonus to be here today and talk to you and your listeners.
Awesome. So for those that are listening, because it's early in the morning, share a little bit about who you are, what you do, and we'll start with that.
So I think of myself as a combination of a consultant and an accidental CFO.
Mm-hmm.
I started in audit, worked for one of the big accounting firms, transferred into consulting, did a lot of strategy consulting and other things. And then along the way, kept finding out that people really didn't understand the numbers. They didn't understand how they made money. They didn't understand how to optimize their business. And I sort of then became a CFO through my relationship at William and Mary, which is my alma mater. And I went down there and was the CFO at the Mason School of Business, which I no longer do anymore, but have remained as the CFO at the foundation while still doing a lot of other coaching, leadership, training, and consulting.
So with your expertise in accounting and finances, what are the biggest challenges that you're seeing facing CFOs today within, those financial professionals?
Today, it's very difficult for CFOs. If you think about all the things we struggle with in our day-to-day lives, how much does it cost to buy your groceries?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's very expensive these days. And to fill up my gas tank.
And to fill up your gas tank. There are wars that we're concerned about in Ukraine. There's today, we watch what's going on politically here in the US and in other parts of the world. CFOs have to think about all of those things, not only for their households, but they have to think about how they impact their companies. And what that means is they're dealing with the unknown.
Right. A lot of unknowns at this moment.
A lot of unknowns, and probably more unknowns from a finance standpoint than we've had for at least 20 years. And a lot of people would say than we've had since the 1980s, which was the last time we really had significant inflation and economic challenges that the CFOs had to deal with.
So when it comes to that, a lot of what's what you mentioned creates ambiguity. So how does someone manage best in times of significant ambiguity that we're currently experiencing?
It's hard. And what you have to realize is there's nobody who has the answers. But when you're sitting at the C-suite table, or whether you're the financial professional who supports a CFO or another part of a company, what you have to realize is people are looking you to provide, and you can't see it on the radio, but I'll say in air quotes, answers.
Right.
And there aren't answers. And so the question that you have to step back and think about is what might happen, and what are the options? And how do I think about what could happen? And in thinking about what could happen, you begin to talk to people about, here's option A, here's option B, here's option C. Let's sit down and talk about which one of these seems most likely, and where do we want to go? And it's very uncomfortable. In fact, I was on the phone this morning with a CFO who is the CFO at a company business. And they're looking at what to project for their sales next year.
Right.
And they're in a business where their raw material costs have gone up 15, 20% over the last year, and they've had to raise prices. But now the raw material costs are coming back down. So as they begin to think about how they talk to their banks, if sales prices come down, their sales will actually fall.
Right.
Even though they actually may be doing better. So how do you explain that to people? It's tough, but it's actually sitting down and thinking through what might happen and how do we chart the best course collectively that we can. It's not only about the numbers,
Right,
but it is partly about the numbers.
right. So funny enough, my girlfriend's the slats on her bed, like when her kid was younger, he used to jump on the bed, and the other day it just broke. It's like one side of the bed just kind of collapsed. So her husband went to go buy new slats for the bed, which originally there was like maybe $3 a piece for a slat. Now it's $8 a piece for a slat. So yeah, so how do you're exactly what you're talking about is crazy.
It is crazy. And the other side to this is how long is some of this craziness going to last? You know, it's interesting. We went through a period of time of relative stability in terms of labor force, inflation, all of those types of things. And now, in addition to those, we're still dealing a little bit with the pandemic. And what the CFO and the management team have to think about is not only what are the trends I'm seeing today, but also what are the black elephants that they might face. Have you ever heard the story of a black elephant?
No. White elephant at Christmas time, I've heard.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of an interesting story, and I use it when I'm talking to CFOs and actually others in the C-suite. So everybody knows what a black swan is, right? It's an event that you never thought would happen, and it happens. And the black swan got its name from European explorers many, many years ago. They had only ever seen white swans in Europe.
Right.
And then they go off on their ships and they see black swans, which are totally natural in other parts of the world. But they think they're miraculous because swans are supposed to be white.
Right.
So the black swan event became something that people talked about as the totally unexpected. We also talk about the elephant in the room.
Yes. Very familiar with the elephant in the room.
And the elephant in the room is somebody that everybody knows is there, but they don't want to plan for it and don't want to deal with it. So
the avoidance strategy.
Yes. And so there's a phrase that's been coined now is what's the black elephant in the room, which is the unexpected event that's there, but do you have to figure out what you're going to do with it? And a pandemic, for example, is a black elephant. We have universities that teach public health that teach courses on how to manage pandemics. Pandemics have been around forever, but we don't want one, and we don't plan for one. So now we've got these factors of disrupted workforce, inflation, and disease/pandemic. They're all to a degree black elephants. How long are they with us? How long are they going to be here? And that's part of what we have to think about.
Yeah, because we don't really know.
We don't.
So we have to plan accordingly.
Right.
Yeah. Very, very true. So what do executives have to think about and manage risk for their companies? And
so as you think about those things we just talked about, those all introduce a level of uncertainty and risk. Part of the CFO's job is to manage risk. And normally what a lot of people say is, well, that's what you have insurance for, right? So the CFO goes and they buy insurance. We're here on ESPN. There's not a sports owner around who doesn't have insurance on their best players.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
But there's also other things that could be risks for your business. And so part of the role of the finance professional is to take those concepts of risk and cost and likelihood that something is going to happen and factor then what do we need to do as we run the business to
Yeah.
control that risk when it's not necessarily a financial risk. And usually that gets done sitting around a table with everybody coming together and saying, what's the biggest thing that could disrupt my part of the business?
Right.
How are we going to control it? How are we going to think about it? So the CFO or the financial professional has to think not only about the insurable risk, but also about the other risks that are out there. So for example, you were talking about the slats on the bed.
Yeah.
Maybe what needs to happen is if you think prices are going to go up, you need to stockpile inventory so that you'll actually have it at a lower price. Or maybe you think it's not attainable due to shipping issues.
Right.
So those are the types of risks that people can think about as well as the insurable risks.
Right. So I had on last week's show, Nicole Inkle with Windy Hill Golf Course and Sports Complex, which I posted today. And basically she bought the business in 2020 or 2021, I forget. But her biggest challenge was supply chain management.
Right.
She could not get golf balls. She couldn't get the tee boxes. I mean, she struggled getting golf carts. I mean, 2 years later, she still hasn't gotten the golf cart that she wanted. So these things are still a challenge. And then how do businesses deal with this from a financial perspective?
It's not just financial in the sense of thinking about the numbers, but it's how does it disrupt operations?
Yeah.
And the CFO has to sit at the table and say, how do we begin to think through what alternative courses of action are and what's that going to cost us? And can we afford to either do it or can we afford not to?
Right.
So for example, she might have been able to get golf balls or tee boxes from a different supplier, but it would have cost 3 or 4 or 5 times more.
Right.
So what does that do to her business?
I know.
And how does she think about that? And how does she think about what it does to her cash flow, operating profit, her bank relations? That's where somebody who's managing the business and really understands the operation has to partner with the financial people to say, let's look at this holistically and then make the best decision.
That is, very good approach. And she did the best that she could based on the circumstances that she happened to be in. And she luckily was very successful, but she an issue for everyone.
It is.
Yeah. So when it comes to, what about the people side? Is being a CFO all about the numbers? Because for some it is. They run their life by the numbers.
You're right. But what I would say to you is that the really, really strong CFOs understand the numbers, but they put them in the context of how it impacts people. If you look at a lot of recent surveys where CEOs and board members are asking, what's the number one thing that we really need in a CFO? The number one thing they need is a trusted advisor.
Yeah.
The number 2 thing they need is a strong collaborator. And so it's interesting that if you really look at a lot of CFOs, I think people think the traditional route for a CFO to come up is from the accounting side.
Right, right.
A lot of good CFOs actually don't come from the accounting side.
Really?
Yeah.
See, that kind of surprises me. Or if maybe you majored in finance or something in college.
Yeah. You have to have some numbers and some familiarity with numbers, but you also have to understand the business strategy and what the numbers mean and how to advise people. And that's sort of why I call myself an accidental CFO. I never really wanted to be a CFO. But when the opportunity came to help people think about how do you best structure a business? What are the options that are out there? How do you make those decisions based on sound modeling and planning? That's really kind of fun stuff. And it makes a big difference to the outcomes in the businesses.
So for example, what would that look like if you're going to structure a business?
So I'm working with a company right now where we're trying to figure out how to price products.
Mm-hmm.
And these particular outcomes are multi-year products. So you can't like look for 6 months.
Right.
So you have to look 5 years or 10 years out.
Mm-hmm.
So we've built a very simple model that says, if you think about these things, if I price them this way, here's where I am in 5 years or 10 years. If I price it this way, here's where I am in 5 years or 10 years. And if I price it this way, here is where I am. And we begin to look at product mix. Are we better off to expand our products and have 5 or 6 or 10 products? Or are we better off to narrow, which by itself is riskier, because what if one of them doesn't become or goes out of favor? But it's actually sitting with the leadership and saying, okay, this is what your company will look like in terms of capital need and profitability. Now, here's where people push back. You can't know the answers to those questions. You're right.
Yeah.
But you can make really strong educated guesses and look at trends and say, here's what the likely trends are going to be. And so make your decisions with an understanding of what's going to happen. It's not my decision, but it is my opportunity to have great input to those people to say, as you make this decision, if you make it with a sound understanding of the financial implications, your business is more likely to succeed.
There you go. Which is some great information, especially, and even if you're basing it on trends, at least you have some information to base it on, rather than just pulling something out of the air. Absolutely. So how is technology changing the role of financial professionals today?
You know, it probably is having the biggest impact on the finance area of anything that's impacted that area for the last 15 to 20 years. We all hear artificial intelligence, we all hear robotics. Those things are alive and well in companies. And so what is happening if you leverage technology appropriately is you're doing away with the routine of accounting and freeing up time for people to think.
Which is by using technology.
So what you really want is you want technology to do the routine, and then you want your people to be doing the analysis and coming up with insights that are providing those options and possible decision routes.
So, and technology is used, in every business. I mean, it's simply from a computer to telephone system to whatever. But so how do you make sure that you are investing in the right company, be more